What's up folks, Mike here at Welling Watches and welcome to the video. This is the second video in this series where we take a look at how to strip down and service a watch movement. If you've already watched the first video, you'll know that we've uncased the movement and removed the dial and hands safely. So in this video we're going to be going over how to strip down the movement into its component parts in preparation for cleaning. So just before we start that, I'm going to go briefly over some of the tools that you might need if you're looking at taking this up as a hobby, or you just don't know where to begin in terms of what kind of tools you're going to need. Now, you don't need to go out and spend a ridiculous amount of money on the high-end branded tools. You can compromise on the more cost-effective tools, and yeah, that's perfectly fine to start there. So you can build up your tool collection as you progress through your learning. So I did touch briefly in the first video about getting a parts tray. Now this is a Swiss parts tray. You don't have to get one of these. You can use almost any compartment tray as long as you can keep all the parts separate and safe and be able to cover it to protect it against any dust. So you can find these in jewellery and craft stores and things like that. So anything that has compartments that you can put things in to keep them all safe. I would recommend a case cushion. You can get silicone types like this, and you can also get leather or faux leather ones. You can get them relatively cheap, and they're quite good because you can place the movement on it when you're not using a movement holder, and they don't scratch the movement or casing or do any damage. So getting one of those can be quite handy. The next obvious thing to get would be a movement holder. This keeps the movement secure as you're disassembling it or reassembling it or testing it and checking it and things like that. So a movement holder is a good idea. This is a carbon fibre one, but you can actually pick up metal ones as well. Some of them can be quite cost effective and some of them can be quite expensive, so do whatever suits your budget. For this video I'm going to be using two different types of tweezers. I've got some really fine ends and I've got some slightly rounded ends which I've shaped myself. These are two regular pairs that I use. Tweezers are quite important when it comes to doing anything with watches. You do want a fairly decent pair of tweezers, but they can be quite expensive, up to £30–40 just for one set. So you can always start off on the cheaper sets and then work your way up to something more expensive. After the tweezers, you're going to need a set of screwdrivers. So here I've got the most common screwdrivers that I use when I'm disassembling a movement, but you can get complete sets similar to this one here. This is a version set with some of them already on the table, and I think there's 9 screwdrivers in this set, each of varying sizes, starting from 0.5 all the way up to 2.5. You probably won't use all of them all of the time, but you'll have the whole selection there, and this was about £90 here in the UK. So I don't use a super expensive set. I use this set because they're really comfortable. And perhaps I'll do a video on some of the basic tools that you'll need to do this kind of work. So back to this video where we're going to be stripping down this movement. Now, how I disassemble a movement is my own chosen way of doing it. Other people may do it differently. Manufacturers may state to do it differently, but this is the way that I choose to do it, and you're welcome to copy that if you choose to. So before we begin, we'll get a set of finger cots. Even though the movement's going to be cleaned, it is good practice to use finger cots. So as I disassemble the movement, my head might get in the way, so excuse me if that happens. And I'll explain all the different part names as I disassemble it. So from the first video, we've already powered down the movement, so there's no power left in the mainspring, so it's pretty safe to work on. So try and zoom in a little bit here. And I'll try and remember to keep it all in frame. Yeah, that seems fine. So where we actually start, or where I choose to start, is starting from this side, and I'm going to remove the hour wheel, and next I'm going to remove the cannon pinion. And the reason for removing the cannon pinion first is that when you turn the movement over to remove the train wheels, you won't be able to get the centre wheel out until the cannon pinion is removed. And to remove the cannon pinion, I'm using a cannon pinion tool. Again, this is another tool that you don't absolutely have to have, but it's a good investment if you're planning on doing this as a long-term hobby. So we've removed the cannon pinion, and at the end of the video I'll show you where all the parts go in my tray so that you can see how I keep things organised. So now that the cannon pinion's free, we can leave the setting and motion work in place, and we can flip the movement over, and this is where the movement holder comes in. So we're going to fit this to the movement holder. So there's no power in the movement, so we can now safely start removing the escapement. So we're going to start off by removing the balance bar and doing this screw here, which holds the cock in place. Check that's in frame. And just underneath the cock there's a little cutout where the cock can be lifted, and whenever you're lifting the balance, always be careful and gentle when you do it, otherwise you can damage the delicate pivots on the balance wheel. So that's the cock has come off there, and we can gently lift that, raise that up, and gently turn it upside down. Now for the moment we're going to leave the balance to one side because we're going to refit this once the whole movement has been disassembled, and I'll go over the reason why at the end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the pallets by removing the pallet cock, which is secured here by these two screws. And you should only do this when the mainspring power is fully down. So we've released the two screws there. Now we can gently again prise the cock up, ever so gently, so as not to damage the pivot on the pallets. So there we go. That little cock is released, and we've now removed the pallets. And the pallets are the anchor shape part. Let's see if we can zoom in there. So there's the pallets. Zoom out, get some perspective. So now we've removed the balance and the pallets, which is 2/3 of the escapement. We still have the escape wheel to come out. Now on this particular movement, where we go to next is we start on this side, and we're going to undo the ratchet and the crown wheels. If you'll notice that the screws on the ratchet and the crown are significantly larger than any of the other screws. Now what you want to do is you want to find a screwdriver with the driver head that's almost as wide as the screw itself. So I think we're going to go with a 1.6, so this is quite a large blade. If you use a smaller blade, what you'll find is you'll damage the screws, and you'll also prone to chip the blade and cause even more damage as you're undoing the screws. So use the right size screwdriver for the right size screw in the movement. So we're going to start off with the ratchet wheel. We can grip it just in here with the teeth and raise it off, and that's the ratchet wheel. Now we're going to move on to the crown wheel. The thing to note about the crown wheel and the crown wheel screw is on some movements the thread of the screw is actually left-handed, so you have to turn it counterclockwise to unscrew it, which is pretty counterintuitive compared to most screws, and it's something that you get used to when you're dealing with watch movements, and this is a counter thread. So we're just removing the crown wheel screw and the crown wheel itself. Quite often with the crown wheel what will accompany it is a small shim, which we can see here. So just be aware that when you're removing the crown wheel, to remove the shim as well. This can often come out when you're cleaning it and you'll lose it, and you'll end up with a very wobbly crown wheel. So now we've removed the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel and the shim, we can begin by disassembling the barrel bridge, which is this large plate here. Again, try to use the right size screwdriver. So we're going to undo all 3 screws. And again, around the plates there'll be small cutouts where you can use a driver to gently prise the plate up. So there's the barrel bridge there. Now on this movement you can actually leave the click and spring it in place until it's been cleaned and ready for reassembly and lubrication. It can stay there, that way you're not going to lose the click or the spring, and your cleaning agents will usually be able to get in there without too much of a problem. So what we have now is we have the mainspring barrel and the centre wheel exposed, but we're going to continue by removing the train wheel bridge here. Now some people do like to use brass tweezers when they're working on a movement, so as not to scratch the movement plates, and you can get all different kinds of brass tweezers. These are a pair of Dumont brass tweezers. I'm using these steel ones because I very rarely scratch the movement, and during assembly I have a tendency to use the brass tweezers just to be doubly sure that I'm not going to scratch the movement. But for the purpose of this video I'm just going to use my standard round nose tweezers. Tweezers are one of those kind of tools, everybody has their own preference, so there's nothing absolutely gospel. So there we go, there's the bridge removed. And now we can take away all the working parts in here. So we have the mainspring barrel and the mainspring in there, we have the centre wheel, the third wheel, the fourth wheel, usually with a seconds pinion, and the escape wheel. So we can start with removing the centre wheel, then the third wheel, and you want to be careful with the fourth wheel because there might be a seconds pinion attached, so you want to remove that by lifting it up. And there's the, you probably won't be able to see it, but there's a fourth wheel pinion there. And then we can remove the escape wheel, and then we can remove the barrel, and we can keep this on the bench because we're going to partly disassemble that. So that's the entire working side removed, and now we're going to flip it over and we can now remove the keyless and the remaining motion work. So we secure the movement in place in the holder. Now there's one screw here securing the setting lever in place, and we're going to undo this slightly, and then we're going to release the tension on the setting lever before we remove it fully. And it's always important with any movement that you're working on that you release the tension of any springs that you're about to release, because if you don't, and you forget and you don't do this, they'll have a tendency to fly across the room and you'll spend the rest of your life trying to find the damn thing. So the part we're undoing here is the setting lever, so we're going to just release the screw partially, and then we're going to lift this part of the setting lever so the tension lifts off there, and as you can see the setting lever sprung about, so there's no tension left there, so we can safely unscrew the rest of it and remove this setting lever. Underneath the setting lever we have the minute wheel, the setting wheels. Sometimes there is one and sometimes there are two. So we can remove the minute wheel, first setting wheel and the second setting wheel. Now another important tool to have, which I forgot to mention at the start, and now I can't, oh there it is the use of pegwood. Now in this case we have the yoke spring here, which we want to release. So the good idea here is to use pegwood to keep the spring in place as we release the tension. And that way that spring doesn't go flying off across the room. So that's the yoke spring, and this is the yoke. And now all we have to do is flip the movement over and undo the setting lever bolt. Now you might have noticed from the very first video about not letting the setting bolt unscrew fully, and this is the part that will fall off on the other side if you do fully unscrew the setting lever bolt. And in the case of almost any watch that you're working on, if you've completed reassembly and you've got the dial and hands back on and you manage to undo this too much, you'll have to take off the dial and hands again just to get to that. So it can be quite an annoying thing. So just remember about the setting lever bolt, but in this case we can actually remove the setting bolt. So we can use the case cushion here and go for a slightly smaller driver. Fit that in the slot and fully unscrewed. So that's the setting lever bolt. Then we can pull the stem out. As we lift the plate away, we're left with the setting lever, the clutch wheel, or the winding pinion, and the clutch wheel. So now all we have left is the main plate. And what we're going to do here, just before it goes in the cleaner, is we're going to refit the balance. And this is a good practice to do, as when you reattach the balance to the movement and it's complete, you're protecting the pivots and you're protecting the balance from any damage during the cleaning process. So this is my chosen method. You don't have to use this method, but it's a method that I choose to use and it works really well. So I'm going to use the loop to make sure I can see the staff pivot go in. And then we're going to locate the cock in position. And we're not going to push down fully. I'm going to make sure that the balance is in place. And we gently tuck it down with a piece of pegwood, so we're not scratching the movement here. So you can use pegwood as much as you like, it's not going to scratch the movement. And then we can refit the screw. Whenever you're refitting screws to a movement, you don't have to screw them in so tight that nobody's ever going to get them out. You want an appropriate amount of pressure. So there we go, the balance is refitted into the main plate, and that'll be very safe whilst it's going through the cleaning process. So we can put that to one side in the tray. And last but not least, we're going to do the mainspring. Now some people like to remove the mainspring entirely and clean it separately. I like to just remove the cover and the arbor and clean the whole thing, the machine, and then hand clean it afterwards, which I'll go over probably in the next video. But in order to release the mainspring, you can just pop the cover off like so, then using tweezers just get under the cover and we've released the lid there. And then with the mainspring barrel, we want to remove the arbor. So to prevent damaging anything to the mainspring, we're going to grip the barrel with brass tweezers. We're going to turn in the opposite way to the hook, and we've released the barrel arbor there, and the mainspring and barrel. So just put that away. Maybe we need to zoom out a little bit here. There we go. So now the movement is fully stripped down and it is ready to go into the cleaner. So the next stage, which I'm not going to video because it's pretty boring, is you would fill up your baskets for your cleaner. So here are the baskets that I have, which use micro mesh. But you'd inspect the parts just before you put them in each basket, and then it will go through the cleaning process. But as you can see in this tray, I usually like to use two different trays. One tray for the casing parts, dial and hands and things like that, and the other tray for the movement parts. But for the example of this video, this simplifies it by just using one tray. So in this section we have the setting and motion work. In this one we have the pallets and the train wheels. In this one we have the pallet cock and train bridge and all the related screws. This is the barrel, the ratchet, the crown, and the barrel bridge screws, and then the barrel plate there. So this is a rough idea of how I organise my movements when I strip them down. Gives you a general idea. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put these through the cleaner, and then in the next video we're going to go over assembly and lubrication, and it might take two parts to that video as there's quite a lot of things to go over. But hopefully this video has proven helpful to those of you out there looking to start stripping down your movement and understand how to go about that if you're starting with a basic movement. So until then, I will see you in the next video, and hopefully you'll join me then. So take care.